So we're going to start with basic comprehension questions. One other thing too. These question types all have different methods, slightly different methods, but they all focus on these fundamentals that we talk about, right? They all focus on finding evidence from the passage and matching that evidence to the answer choices. So we'll talk about basic comprehension questions first. These are kind of the most straightforward question types that you'll see. You have to identify what the author says about a particular idea or what the author says in a particular area of the passage, and then kind of directly match that to the answer choices. It's just, can you understand what's going on in the passage, and can you match that to an answer choice? It doesn't require you to kind of connect any dots or anything like that. It should be sort of direct, sort of straightforward. Doesn't mean it's going to be easy, right? Straightforward and easy are not the same thing. Doesn't mean it's easier or harder than other question types. It's just that it's the most simple, I guess. The way that you can identify a basic comprehension question is that it will ask about something specific that happened in the passage. It'll ask about what happens in the passage. It might say according to the passage, or it might ask you, this is not something I wrote in here, but it might ask you something along the lines of like, what happens in paragraph 4? It would be probably worded a little bit differently than that, but it's going to ask you about something specific that happens in the passage, or it's going to ask you what happens in a particular area of the passage. Our method for solving basic comprehension questions: we are going to return to the paragraph that the question asks about and reread it. And while we reread, we are going to be looking out for information that helps us answer the question. So based on what the question's asking, we are going to be scanning for information that's relevant or related to that question. Once we've done that and we've found our evidence, we are going to check all 5 answer choices to see if any of them match. And as we go, we're going to eliminate choices that don't match. Pretty straightforward. Let's give it a shot here. This question asks, in the last paragraph, the speaker implores his listeners to what? So one note here. As we go through these practice, a lot of the questions will tell us where to look. In those cases, for the sake of practice, we're not going to read the entire passage. We're not going to do active reading for the entire passage. For questions that don't ask us specifically where to look, or for questions that refer to the entire passage or multiple parts of the passage, we will do active reading for the whole passage. And this is just for the sake of time for this practice, right? Because we are only doing 1 or 2 questions per passage. On your test, you should always do active reading for the entire passage first, and then go and do all of the questions. And again, just for the 2 reading passages, right? Not the writing passages. The only reason we're not doing it is because we're just doing 1 question at a time, and we're focusing more on the question type itself. So this question here, in the last paragraph, the speaker implores his listeners to what? So it tells us where to look. We are only kind of focusing on this last paragraph. We also already did our active reading for this passage. So it tells us the last paragraph. We're going to reread the last paragraph, and we are going to scan for evidence about what the speaker implores his listeners to do. So let's see. Condemn me elsewhere as much as you please, but this you must admit. You may taunt the ministry with having coalesced me. You may raise the vulgar cry of Irishmen and Papists against me. You may send out men called ministers of God to slander and calumniate me. They may assume whatever garb they please, but the question comes into this narrow compass. I demand, I respectfully insist, on equal justice for Ireland, on the same principle by which it has been administered to Scotland and England. I will not take less. Refuse me that if you can. Okay. Go ahead, take a second. Hopefully, you should have been identifying the evidence as you read, right? But if you weren't able to, take about 5 seconds, see if you can find it. I know I found some evidence that I like. I just want to give you a chance just settle in a little bit first, and then I will point out the evidence that I found. All right, so we're looking for what the speaker implores his listeners to do. What he tells them to do, well, I demand, I respectfully insist on equal justice for Ireland on the same principle by which it has been administered to Scotland and England. I will not take less, refuse me if you can. That's the first thing that jumped out to me, right? He is imploring them to give equal justice for Ireland. That's what the evidence that I found. I think also another thing he may tell them to do, he says, condemn me elsewhere as much as you please, but you must admit. So maybe it's also, he's imploring them to admit that, admit that they need to give justice to Ireland or something like that. So now let's take a look at the answer choices and see which one matches. And again, I'm going to have you guys take a look at this part first. I'm going to zoom out a little bit so you can see the answer choices and the evidence here and the paragraph itself. Take a couple seconds, look through each of these answer choices, eliminate incorrect answer choices as you go, and see if you can find which one matches the evidence. And then once you're done, unpause and I'll go through them as well. Okay. So A, he implores his listeners to provide an explanation for why the Irish people have not yet received equal justice under the law. So the part about Irish people not yet receiving equal justice under the law does match the evidence that we found, right? Because he's asking for equal justice for them. But nowhere in here does he ask his listeners to provide an explanation. He's not asking for an explanation. He's asking for change, right? So I don't think that A can be the correct answer here. This is an example of a partially right answer choice, right? The second part, yeah, that matches, but the first part does not. Therefore, the entire answer choice is incorrect. B says he implores his listeners to explore two distasteful alternatives and choose one of them over the other. Okay, so this is kind of vague, right? It's not specific, but I don't think it matches, even if we do kind of zoom out a little bit and make the evidence that we found more vague. He's not asking anyone to kind of choose between two bad options. He is telling them to pick his side, essentially. He's not even giving them much of an option, right? He's saying, I will not take less. You must admit this. You must help me with this, right? So you may taunt me, but I demand equal justice for Ireland. He's not giving them two options and asking them to choose. So not B. C, he implores his listeners to accept that conflict is inevitable when negotiating political compromise. No, that doesn't really match the evidence either. He is not talking about negotiating. He's not talking about conflict being inevitable. So I think C we can pretty easily eliminate. D, the speaker implores his listeners to set aside their personal aversion to his character in favor of equal justice for the people of Ireland. Okay, that one's interesting. So in favor of equal justice for the people of Ireland, we know that's correct, right? That matches kind of the second part of, or the last part down here, right? What about set aside their personal aversion to his character? Well, I think that fits as well, right? At the top, he says, condemn me elsewhere as much as you please. Condemn me, right? Talk negatively about me. But you must admit this. You must, even if you don't like me, right? Even if you have an issue with me, you must give justice to the people of Ireland, right? You may taunt the ministry with having coalesced me. You may raise the vulgar cry of Irishmen and Papists against me. You may send out men called ministers of God to slander me. But even if you do this, I demand unequal justice for Ireland. So yeah, D seems to work pretty well here, right? He's saying, even if you don't like me, that's fine. You don't have to like me, but do the right thing for Ireland. D seems pretty good. Let's check out E. The speaker implores his listeners to join him in the struggle for Irish liberation. Again, partially correct, right? Irish liberation, yes, but join him in the struggle, no. He is not asking, he's not kind of asking people to help him with this, you know, to kind of fight with him. He is talking to people that have the power to make the change, right? So he is directly asking them to make the change. He's not asking them to join him in the struggle. He's asking them to do something about it and to give Ireland the rights that they deserve. So E is not correct. D is going to be the correct answer here. And that's what I mean about a direct match, right? Each of these is a direct kind of rephrasing of something that we identified in the passage. And that's how basic comprehension questions tend to be. You can find direct kind of rephrasing from the passage to the answer choice. The next question type we're going to talk about are underlying purpose questions. Underlying purpose questions don't ask us to identify what the passage is saying or what the author is saying. They ask us to identify why the author is saying it. So it's similar to basic comprehension. It's just taken a half step forward, right? In addition to being able to identify what's being said, we need to be able to identify why. We need to identify the purpose of why this is in the passage, what it does for the passage. And the way to identify an underlying purpose question type, it'll say something along these lines, like in paragraph 2, in paragraph 5, in line 4, whatever. The writer mentions this thing primarily to what? Or, you know, why does the writer use this phrase or something like that, right? It's all about why the author does something, what the author is trying to achieve by doing something. That's how it's going to be phrased. Whoops. Okay, pretend that's not there. So the first steps are the same as basic comprehension, right? We're still returning to the specified area of the passage because it's going to tell us where in the passage we're looking for underlying purpose every time it's going to tell us. So we're going to return to that area of the passage. We are going to scan for what the question's asking about. We're going to find evidence, and we're going to match that evidence with the answer choices. But we do have one additional strategy here, and that is our verb scanning strategy. Since underlying purposes ask why a writer does something, the answer choices always have a key verb, right? If you're asking why, it's going to be, you know, to do this, to do that, to achieve this, to argue that. There's always going to be a key verb that answers the why. Most of the time, not all of the time, most of the time it's the first word of each answer choice. If we can identify that key verb, we can narrow down the answer choices just from that verb. Now, we're never going to be able to choose a correct answer choice just based on that verb, right? We still need to read the rest of the answer choices because there are a lot of components to check out to make sure it's correct. It just might give us one or two answer choices that are definitely wrong that we can eliminate right away, right? If we identify that the purpose of something is to compare two ideas, but one of the answer choices says to prove something wrong, right? Well, we know that's not right. That's something completely different for what we know the purpose is. So that's kind of how we can use this verb scanning to narrow down our options. So we're working with the same passage here, the one about Ireland. The question asks, in the opening paragraph, the writer provides two possible outcomes to the problems in Ireland, primarily to what? And if you look, right, suggest, explain, emphasize, suggest, highlight. In this case, a lot of these verbs are very similar, so we might not be able to eliminate any of them at all with our verb scanning, and that's fine, that happens sometimes. But we can check on that in a little bit. So first, let's reread the first paragraph, right? Because that's where it tells us to look. Let's identify some evidence about the writer providing two possible outcomes, and some evidence about why he does that. And then we can do our verb scanning, and then we can try to find the correct option. It appears to me impossible to suppose that the House will consider me presumptuous in wishing to be heard for a short time on this question. one in the highest degree interesting to the people of Ireland. It is whether we mean to do justice to that country, whether we mean to continue the injustice which had already been done to it, or to hold out the hope that it will be treated in the same manner as England and Scotland. That is the question. Right, whether we mean to continue the injustice that has already been done, or to hold out the hope that it will be treated in the same manner as England and Scotland. Whether we mean to do justice. So, the two possible outcomes are continuing the injustice which has already been done to it. That's one possible outcome. The other possible outcome is holding out hope that it will be treated in the same manner as England and Scotland. Those are the two outcomes here. Why does the author, in the context of this paragraph, right, why does the author pose these two outcomes? Why does the author provide these two outcomes? Well, you know, on a more basic level, we could say, oh, well, he's trying to just show what the possible outcomes are, right? Yeah, that's true. But the way he phrases this kind of tells us he's doing a little bit more here, right? The question is whether we mean to do justice to that country. We can assume if he's describing it that way that he thinks justice is good, right? We should do justice to that country. So by phrasing it that way, and then also the way he phrases each of these outcomes, we can kind of almost get an idea of which one he thinks is the correct way to go and which one's the incorrect way, right? Whether we mean to continue the injustice which has already been done to it. Well, that obviously he thinks is the bad outcome, right? He thinks it's bad to continue the injustice. Or to hold out the hope that it will be treated in the same manner as England and Scotland. Hope, positive word, right? Injustice, negative word. Treated in the same manner as England and Scotland, right? He thinks that they're not being treated fairly, but he's hopeful that they could be treated fairly. The way he kind of explains the two outcomes gives us some idea of how he feels about each of them. So why is he giving us these two outcomes? Well, probably to show that one is better than the other, right? That one is right and one is wrong. Something like that. Now, if we take a look at the answer choices here, again, verb scanning, suggest, explain, emphasize, suggest, highlight. In this case, these verbs are all way too similar, right? They all mean very similar things, so I don't think we can eliminate any right away, which is fine. So we have to kind of read the entire answer choices for all of these. A says the writer provides the two possible outcomes to the problems in Ireland, primarily to suggest to his audience that one of those outcomes is more fair-minded than the other. Yeah, I think that works pretty well, right? That's in line with what I kind of just said. And it makes sense, right? One of these is definitely explained positively, one is definitely explained negatively, right? The first outcome is about injustice, the second outcome is about hope and being treated fairly, the same way as England and Scotland. So A, probably correct. Let's hold on to that. B, the writer provides two possible outcomes, primarily to explain why the British are reluctant to extend equal treatment to Ireland. No, it doesn't talk about the British being reluctant to extend equal treatment here. It's all about his opinions of the possible outcomes, right? It's not talking about why the British do anything. So B is not correct. C, the writer provides two possible outcomes to the problems in Ireland, primarily to emphasize the influence of Irish nationalism on his political thinking. There are some components to this that are okay, right? It does demonstrate his political thinking, his personal perspective, right? And his personal perspective does seem to be in favor of fair treatment for Ireland. However, we don't know anything about Irish nationalism. That's kind of an assumption we would be making. So that's probably bad for that reason. Also, the purpose of this is not to emphasize that influence, right? The purpose, the reason he is doing this is to kind of show the difference between these two outcomes. The purpose of him doing this is not to show that he is an Irish nationalist, right? So even if it does kind of show that he favors Ireland, that's not the purpose, right? So even if that was the case, it still wouldn't be the correct answer because it doesn't answer the question. D, The writer provides two possible outcomes to the problems in Ireland, primarily to suggest that the rights of the Irish people had been steadily eroding over time. Again, close, right? This could be a partially correct answer here. Yeah, he does think that the rights of the Irish people have been eroding. When he says, we continue the injustice which has already been done. That does match, but again, that is not the primary purpose here. It is something that is sort of implied by what he says, but his purpose is to show the contrast between the two outcomes. By characterizing the two outcomes in different ways, his purpose is to show that one is good and one is bad. D, even if it is sort of true, again, doesn't answer the question. It's not the purpose, even if it is an effect. And D, the writer provides two possible outcomes to the problems in Ireland, primarily to highlight the atrocities committed against the Irish people under British rule. No, I think we can eliminate E pretty quickly. It is talking about how things are bad for the Irish people under British rule, but it doesn't mention any specific atrocities, right? So you can't highlight the atrocities if you don't talk about what they are. A is going to be the correct answer here. Suggest to his audience that one of the outcomes is more fair-minded than the other. We have another practice here, and this one I'm going to have you guys completely try on your own first before I talk about it at all. Whoops, how do I get rid of that? There it is. So go ahead. This is a passage we haven't looked at all yet. Normally, if we were answering every single question for this, we would start with our active reading strategy, but we're not. We are only answering this one question, and this one question tells us that we're looking at the first paragraph. So you don't have to read the entire thing here. You can just read the first paragraph, and because of that, I'll zoom in a little bit. In the first paragraph, the author makes references to the Declaration of the Rights of Man and the French Revolution for all of the following reasons, except what? So give this one a try, reread the first paragraph, find some evidence, and when you think you have the correct answer, unpause, and I'll go over it. Okay. Except, by the way, a really big word here. We're looking for the one that isn't related to what's going on, not the one that is. Same thought process, right? Just we have to think about it the other way. Instead of eliminating bad answer choices, we're essentially eliminating the good answer choices. So it says, I have come this evening to talk with you on one of the greatest issues of our time. That is the preservation of human freedom. I have chosen to discuss it here in France at the Sorbonne because here in this soil the roots of human freedom have long ago struck deep, and here they have been richly nourished. It was here that the Declaration of the Rights of Man was proclaimed, and the great slogans of the French Revolution, liberty, equality, fraternity, fired the imagination of men. I have chosen to discuss this issue in Europe because this has been the scene of the greatest historical battles between freedom and tyranny. Okay, so I think this is pretty obvious to find kind of the main purpose here, right? He says, here in the soil, the roots of human freedom have long ago stuck deep, and here they have been richly nourished. And then he provides these things as examples, right? The Declaration of Rights of Man was proclaimed, and the great slogans of the French Revolution, liberty, equality, fraternity, fired the imagination of men. Those are examples of how the roots of human freedom have been struck deep and have been richly nourished in France. And then he goes on to say, I have chosen to discuss this issue in Europe because this has been the scene of the greatest historical battles between freedom and tyranny. So it's examples of that as well, right? He's referencing these things to provide examples of what he means about France and Europe having great historical battles between freedom and tyranny and having the roots of human freedom. So we'll take a look at our answer choices. And again, we want to eliminate good answer choices, right? We want to know which is not a reason that he does this. So in this case, our verb scanning maybe won't help us, right? Because we're not looking for the correct answer, we're looking for wrong answers. So maybe we skip the verb scanning if it says except. Let's check each of these and see if they work or if they don't work. So A, The author references the Declaration of the Rights of Man and the French Revolution to refer to important historical events with which most in her audience would be familiar. Okay, yeah, they are important historical events. What is the audience? This passage is adapted from a speech delivered to the United Nations in Paris, France. So yeah, if they're talking to the United Nations, I think they would be familiar with those. So that is possible. I don't think it's the main purpose here, right? But it could be one of the following reasons. And since we're looking for one that is incorrect, I think A is probably going to be one of the reasons, right? I don't think it's going to be the except. Maybe we'll hold on to it for now, because it's not great, but I think it's probably not going to be the correct answer here. B, the author makes references to the Declaration of the Rights of Man and the French Revolution to cite political examples of freedom and human rights instilled in legal documents. Again, yeah, they are political examples of freedom and human rights. They are installed in legal documents. So again, the main purpose is about examples of freedom. It doesn't necessarily have to be things that are in legal documents, but it works, right? So I'm going to go back. I changed my mind. We can eliminate A, and I think we're going to eliminate B too, right? These are way too good to be the except. C, to establish yourself as educated about the subject matter at hand, could be. Definitely could be, right? If she's giving specific examples, that does show that she knows what she's talking about if she's able to come up with examples. So yeah, I think C could be a reason as well. D, to cite examples of very different interpretations of democracy and human rights. That one I think might be the except here. I think this one might be the correct answer here. Because nowhere in this passage does it talk about different interpretations of democracy and human rights, right? She mentions democracy, she mentions human rights, and then she talks about how these two things are supporting that. But they don't have different interpretations. They are kind of two examples of the same interpretation. So I'm going to go ahead and say D is probably correct here. Obviously, we do want to check E as well. To explain why she has chosen to deliver her speech in France, well, we know that definitely is one of the reasons. So D is going to be the correct answer here. It's the only one that doesn't fit with what's going on here. So yeah, same thought process, just kind of backwards from the previous one. Hopefully you got that one correct. If you didn't, hopefully you understand why. Those are underlying purpose questions. Underlying purpose questions are one of the most common question types that you'll see. So definitely important to kind of have a grasp on how they work. Implication questions. So we mentioned that underlying purpose questions are like basic comprehension taken a half step forward. Implication questions are like basic comprehension questions taken a full step forward. You need to understand not only what the author is directly and literally saying, but also what the author is implying, or also what could be inferred from what the author is saying, right? So it's like reading between the lines, right? It's not just what's literally being said, but also what conclusions you can draw from that. You know, if I say, I'm hungry, you know, all right, let's pretend I'm 7 years old, and I go running up to my mom, like, Mom, I'm hungry. Okay, well, what's literally being said is that I'm hungry, right? That's what I'm directly and literally saying. But I'm also implying that I want my mom to give me food, right? I'm not saying give me food, but by saying that I'm hungry, I'm implying that I want food and that I want her to give me food. That's what an implication question asks you to do. You have to figure out not just what's being said, but what is being implied by what's being said. You can identify these question types because they will oftentimes either use the word implies, imply, implied, any tense of the word imply, or infer, any tense of the word infer. They may ask what the author implies, they may ask how the author implies a certain idea, or they may ask what the reader can infer from what's written. Again, our methods are, or our steps for solving these are mostly the same as basic comprehension, right? Return to the passage, find evidence, match the evidence. But the difference here is that the answer choices won't be a direct restatement from the passage, right? We talked about way back here how it's just kind of directly rephrasing what the passage says for basic comprehension a lot of the time. For implication questions, instead of finding a direct restatement, the correct answer choice is probably going to be a combination of multiple pieces of evidence, or a combination of like what you get if you put all the hints in the passage together. So you want to identify as much evidence as you can, and then identify the answer choice that aligns with your understanding of the evidence that you've identified. Instead of being a direct restatement from the passage, it's going to be more the sum of all the evidence. But yeah, the method is mostly the same other than that.